Hello. Today I want to talk about the development of European print culture and its initial social impact. For those interested in this topic, I would recommend two more of my videos, one on printing, knowledge and ideas, and the second on the sociological concept of the public sphere, advanced by the German social theorist Jurgen Habermas. There's also a related video on London coffeehouses and Habermas's public sphere. I will give links to all three videos in the note below this one. First then, let me quickly recap the early history of Western printing. As you will remember, this centered on typography, that is, the printing from movable type made from metal, rather than xylography or woodblock printing, as had predominated in East Asia. Xylography was used, however, in the West in the production of images that sometimes accompanied early printing. The basic techniques were first developed in the German Rhineland in the mid-15th century, but rapidly spread to other parts of Europe, particularly from the 1470s onwards, such that by 1499 printers had set up shop in some 251 centres across Europe, and around 1,000 printing presses were in operation. This new technology had a revolutionary impact on book production, and the number of books produced in the first half-century of printing was enormous. By 1500, between 30 and 40,000 titles had been printed, and the total number of printed books then in circulation in Europe was probably at least 10 million volumes. The volume of production increased in the following years, and by 1550 it was possible to produce almost 3 million books in a single year, more than had been produced by scribes across the whole of Europe during the entire 14th century. With the rapid diffusion of printing across Western Europe, large numbers of relatively cheap books and other printed materials were soon being produced, covering a wide range of subjects, including religion, political ideas and practice, technology and science. There seems little doubt that this much greater availability of written material encouraged literacy, particularly in Protestant countries where individual Bible reading was greatly encouraged. But it also led to a wider diffusion of ideas, as an author's views could quickly be circulated throughout Europe, and a popularization of knowledge, including the production of illustrated news sheets and the like, which could be accessed by the semi-literate and could be read to those who could not read. At a scholarly level, printing also led to a more critical approach to texts, as mistakes and contradictions could be more easily seen and corrected. Mistakes in manuscripts, by contrast, might not be spotted, and when manuscripts were recopied, errors could sometimes creep in. Significantly, this form of mass printing did not spread widely outside Europe and its overseas colonies, a fact of crucial importance in tracing the subsequent struggle between traditional and innovative ideas worldwide. The printing revolution in Europe soon had an enormous intellectual, cultural, social, and political impact, most immediately in the Renaissance and Reformation movements, and a little later in the scientific revolution and the political upheavals of the 17th century, which I will discuss in other videos. Thus, it greatly strengthened the development of what has come to be termed Renaissance humanism. The process of rediscovering and reappreciating Europe's classical Roman and Greek heritage had already begun prior to the invention of printing, but the new technology rapidly consolidated it, enabling the wide circulation of new editions of Latin and Greek literature, history and philosophy, as well as contemporary works inspired by these classical texts. Printing also strengthened the critique of the Roman Catholic Church, which gave rise to the Reformation, a complex movement which can be described as Europe's first successful modern revolution. Questioning of church practices and institutions was not new, but had previously been successfully suppressed. Now, printing made it possible for the revolutionary ideas of church reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin to be rapidly disseminated across Europe, both through their original writings and the widespread distribution of Protestant tracts and anti-Catholic cartoons. Printing subsequently also played a key role in the consolidation of the various Protestant churches through the publication of vernacular Bibles, sermons, and hymns. The spread of the new Protestant churches had several major consequences, including the destruction of traditional ideas of European cultural unity, pervasive religious division between Catholics and Protestants that fueled European warfare and revolt through to at least the mid-17th century, the development of a Catholic counter-reformation, including the work of the highly educated Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, established in 1534, and in several Protestant countries a much greater concern with the spread of general education and literacy, Protestantism differing from pre-Reformation Catholicism in putting the written word at the center of religious practice and belief. Religious and political authorities soon sought to suppress the disputations of the Reformation, and pressures for the control of printing increased as ever more volumes poured off the presses. Particularly effective here was the Roman Inquisition, established in 1542, which issued its first index of forbidden books in 1559. Covering the whole of the Catholic world, it sought to either destroy or prohibit entry to a growing list of books in all Catholic countries. It included previously published books as well as new titles, so the writings of the humanist Erasmus were added, as were such contemporary authors as Galileo, Descartes, and Pascal, and later Locke. This suppression was never completely effective. In countries such as France, those who wanted forbidden books might smuggle them in from Protestant countries, particularly Holland, and some printers printed illicit books. But the Inquisition was still able to destroy large numbers of books and create a climate of fear that led to self-censorship. Some books were successfully suppressed, and in countries such as Spain and Portugal, with their own inquisitional processes, books regarded as challenging were completely excluded. Thus the Portuguese went so far as to prevent the establishment of printing presses in Brazil, and the Spanish routinely banned the import of all books on science. Less extensively, after Protestant churches had been established as state religions, the former anti-authoritarian views of the first generation of Protestants generally faded away to be replaced by new orthodoxies in several countries. Let me now make some general comments on the initial wider impact of printing. First, clearly, like modern social media, printing could play an important role in creating autonomous communication networks, and so contribute powerfully to processes of social and political change. Secondly, printing did not play an inevitable or overwhelming role in this change. Printing could facilitate social action, but did not cause it by itself. Other contributory and causal factors were involved. To take the example of the Reformation, printing strengthened the critique of the Roman Catholic Church, so beginning Europe's first successful modern revolution. But Protestant success was not determined by printing, but by the conversion of powerful elites, including the rulers of those states that embraced Protestantism. Thirdly, even when printing played a major role in affecting political and social change, subsequent events could be out of the control or influence of those originally involved in producing and distributing printed material or inspired by it. The Reformation, as an example, was a complex and multifaceted movement which included many contradictory elements, some of which would have horrified the first generation of reformers who used printing so successfully to disseminate their message. More generally, as with modern social media-related movements, the degree of government control was highly relevant. State regimes varied both in the degree of social freedom which they permitted and in their ability and willingness to control printing. Although authoritarian governments commonly saw printing as a threat to their power, as some governments today regard modern social media, they varied in their effectiveness in suppressing dissenting voices and the discussion of sensitive issues. The Iberian powers, for example, were far more effective in preventing the production and circulation of prohibited literature than was France. Again, controls could be circumvented, not just by illegal printing, but by smuggling forbidden books in from elsewhere. In a multi-state system, such as early modern Europe, it was probably inevitable that suppression would never be universally effective. It is worth noting that where suppression was effective, as in Spain and Portugal, the exclusion of challenging books could cut a society off from knowledge of modern ideas and scientific advance. There are also the largely unknown consequences of self-censorship. A few specific instances are known, as with the philosopher Descartes and his decision not to publish some of his scientific work because of the hostility and threats shown towards the astronomer Galileo for his public support for the heliocentric view of the cosmos. But many other instances may remain undiscovered, examples of the potentially destructive force of censoring creativity and original thought. Finally, it's worth returning to the question of European exceptionalism in the early modern period, a situation in which the rapid spread of mass printing played a major part. Thus, not only did printing have a revolutionary impact in Europe, which it had not had in East Asia, but mass printing did not spread widely outside Europe and its overseas colonies, a fact of crucial importance in tracing the subsequent struggle between traditional and innovative ideas worldwide. Indeed, adjoining civilizations, specifically the rulers of the great Russian and Ottoman empires, specifically chose to reject or impede the spread of printing in their realms, a decision which had major consequences in the spread of new ideas, such as those of the scientific revolution. Thank you for listening.